Do note, friends, these first Easter preachers were all women. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other unnamed women. This, too, is a part of how God works. Always surprisingly, from the bottom up, from the edges in, undermining our usual social arrangements until we learn to rearrange them properly. Right? So the women go tell the apostles, and the men's reaction is typical. Their words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. Now, we could make much over the fact that the men didn't believe the women. That's often the case still today, don't you know? And it's true that women in that time didn't qualify as reliable witnesses in legal matters. They were thought to be too emotional, not rational enough. And okay, that too, still today, amazingly. But let's be honest. Regardless of who it was telling them this tale, it would have been difficult to believe, wouldn't it? Now, we live in an especially odd time now. We have people who are otherwise educated and rational, successful in their professional careers even, and yet some of them believe some of the strangest things. For example, some buy into this QAnon quackery and think that John F. Kennedy Jr. is still alive somewhere and waiting in the wings to come back and be the vice presidential candidate in 2024 for Donald Trump. Talk about idle tales. These people actually rallied in our own Dallas not long ago. Now, this is nonsense. And I wouldn't have you think that that's the kind of faith we are promoting for you to believe in this Easter proclamation. Some others, though, do see the Christian proclamation of the resurrection as an idle tale still. Something akin maybe to QAnon. And they don't believe. And in fairness, whether you lived in the first century or the 21st century, the idea of a dead man rising is hard to figure, huh? What's more, you may know that in many cultures there have been myths of dying gods rising again. And you may think this is just another one of them and no truer than the others. Let me tell you, while that's so, all these other myths have something in common that isn't found in our Christian story. They were all used to support the ruling class and to keep them in power over the commoners. Christianity works the other way. It begins from below. It refutes the world of oppression and proclaims liberty to the captives and hope to the hopeless and power to the people. In fact, 6 times in Luke's version of this story that we just heard, the word "but" appears. But on the first day of the week, but they went to the tomb. But the men said to them, but he has risen. But they thought it an idle tale. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. It's almost as if Luke is saying to us, I know this doesn't seem possible, and I grant you that, but God has contradicted all of the things you think you know because God butts in. Evil doesn't win. Death doesn't have the last word. Every human no is countered by God's everlasting yes. I love that even after we are told that the apostles don't believe the women, Peter runs to the tomb to check it out for himself anyway. Which is just what we ought to do today. In Lewis Carroll's book, Through the Looking Glass, the sequel to Alice in Wonderland, the Queen and Alice have an exchange. "I don't care for jam," said Alice. "But it's very good jam," said the Queen. Alice responds, "Well, I don't want any today, at any rate." "Oh," said the Queen, "you couldn't have had it if you wanted it. The rule is jam tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never jam today." Alice objected. "It must come sometimes to jam today." "No, it can't," said the Queen. "It's jam every other day. Today isn't any other day, you know." As my theologian friend Greg Jones puts it, too often we treat the resurrection the way the Queen treats jam. There's Jesus' resurrection in the past, yesterday, and there is the promise of the general resurrection of the dead in the future, tomorrow, but never resurrection today. Yet if Easter means anything, it empowers us to embody the power and hope of the resurrection today. The Easter story calls us to new life and to embody hope in how we live now. But how do we get there? I want to take you back to the sculpture I started with and invite you to think of the empty tomb that way. You won't find meaning from it by dismissing it, walking past it, shaking your head on account of its strangeness. You must do as Peter did and go look for yourself. Look into it earnestly. Let it speak to you. Listen to what others say about it. Faith begins with wonder and amazement, which is what we see in Peter, because faith leads to understanding. I soon learned that the title of the sculpture is Mother and Child, which is fitting for its location, right? And the more I looked at it, the more I wondered whether the twisted steel didn't suggest the twists of the double helix structure of DNA. I started to see the empty spaces in the piece too, and I began to imagine it as a womb that was ready to give birth. Maybe that's the thing we get to when we get to the tomb. We begin to see it as a womb about to give birth to new life in us and for us. Christ Eastering forth again and again. Jam today, after all, for now every new day is Easter.